I just took a practice quiz and failed.
You don't have to know every single defense mechanism. There are things that you just have to know them. You need to know at least the top 5 defense mechanisms. So find the root words and attach the root words to the definition, and it'll help you along the way. These are things that you gotta regurgitate. I know. Ultimately, don't get in your head. Don't forget to leave your comment below and let us know what still needs to be drawn out and how we can help support you as you prepare for your test or as you prepare to continue your practice. If you'd like access to our clinical test prep journal, you can find it in the link below.
I just took a practice quiz and failed.
All right. So what specifically are you struggling with?
The quiz was on defense mechanisms, and I bombed it. Thought I knew them. I didn't.
So the tests are application-based. So what are you struggling with the defense mechanism specifically? Is it because applying them is difficult or deciphering what the key is versus the distractor?
So I'll just explain what I just took. Essentially, it gave from quotes of people saying things to scenarios and just gave you a list of defense mechanisms and was like, just kind of link them up. Mm-hmm. And some of them I knew, like denial. I mean, that was super awesome. I got that one right. But ones like undoing, I didn't do well with that. And intellectualization, I didn't do well with that one either. So I felt like on some of the ones that have kind of like around a lot, like repression, sublimation, those kinds of ones, I did better at. But I feel like the harder ones, like, or in my mind, are harder. I didn't do so well at. So I'm like a little bummed.
Firstly, failing on the test isn't a failure. It doesn't mean you failed.
Oh, and I failed. I bummed.
Failing a test doesn't mean that you failed. So one of the things that I picked up from the last training that I did was they're trying to determine who's guessing on the test versus who actually knows the information. And so they try to simplify it as much as possible. The questions are as simplified as they can be. So everything in the question, in the STEM, is information that you would need to know to be able to answer the question. You have to know KSAs, so knowledge, skills, and abilities. So the knowledge here is defense mechanisms only, right? That was the only thing that you tested on, right?
Yeah, that was it.
Okay.
This one.
So understanding that the knowledge that you have to have is defense mechanisms. Having a general understanding of defense mechanisms then allows you to apply that information to general scenarios that you might need to use that. When you went through the assessment, the questions, you're saying that it was a vignette and then you had to choose which.
It was kind of like a fill in the blank. Like it gave you like just a bunch of defense mechanisms and they just went over 25, 30 questions in there and you had to link them up. And some of them could have been used twice. So you don't get in that thing, well, once I use it one time, it's over. That was not the case.
So that isn't okay.
So I got all my denials correct.
But that is not an ASWB standardized test.
Correct.
So what is it testing you for?
I mean, my knowledge of defense mechanisms.
Totally recall. That is 100% just recall, and that's not standardized testing. But
it didn't have definitions.
Testing.
It didn't have definitions though. That was the thing.
Right.
There was no. It was like reality based, like vignette, which is a lot of the LCSW.
Yes, but the LCSW is not going to give you a fill in the blank ever. That will never be the case. There will always be a clear answer based on the modifier in the STEM. So if the STEM is the question, the modifier or qualifier is most, best, should, first, least, not, etc. It's going to be that thing that qualifies the answer to the question. You'll never have fill in the blank, right? You'll never have a question option that is none of the above, right? That's never going to be an option. If that's the test that you get, then you're in the wrong test. So if that's the case, this test was only measuring your knowledge about defense mechanisms. It was not testing you for how you're going to test. The encouraging part of that is all you have to do is find a way to memorize the defense mechanisms. and the definitions that would go with them. Do you have to memorize every defense mechanism that ever existed for every theory?
No.
Right. What do you have to memorize?
Most common ones?
The most common ones.
Which is why I did so well in denial.
Because denial is going to be a common one, right? Sublimation, reaction formation, repression, intellectualization, any of those defense mechanisms.
Intellectualization didn't go well.
Those are going to be common defense mechanisms that you would likely see on an MSW or an LCSW exam. The others are possibly going to be there, but not often. That's not something that would be standardized across the board, right? So there's no like really specialized information. It's stuff that most social workers would know. It's looking for broad answers. So this study guide, the test that you took, had no bearings on how you're going to do on the test. So saying I bombed the test is overdramatic.
I bombed the quiz.
Okay. So looking for the opportunities there means that you're looking for the opportunity to improve the score on this. You're trying to improve your memorization of defense mechanisms, right?
Mm-hmm.
The better skill is to understand what is the general reason that someone would have a defense mechanism. Why would someone have a defense mechanism?
Protection.
Protection from what?
People themselves.
Emotion, traumatic history, and just any number of things. Defense mechanisms are just that. They're there to defend us from something that's threatening. Okay? So understanding the basic defense mechanisms and how they apply is the better skill. Let's break these down. So the first one, rationalization.
I struggle with not putting the word in there like you try to rationalize something out, you try to make it make sense.
That's great. So they blame circumstances, they blame other situations, they try to explain away why they're in a situation that they're in or why circumstances worked out the way they did, right? And they're essentially protecting themselves from what?
Harm.
Yeah. Be a little more specific, like why rationalization specifically? Like you could say Krav Maga is a defense mechanism. And what are you trying to protect yourself from? A ninja. So I mean, you could say that. You wouldn't, but you could. So why would someone use this style of karate? Like, why is this the defense? Or justify, maybe they're trying to make something that doesn't make sense to them just make sense.
Okay.
Right? They're trying to rationalize it. They're trying to, it's not justification. They're trying to make it make sense. And the easiest way is to point at something else and say, oh, well, if this, then that. So it just doesn't make sense. It feels like it's out of control. It doesn't make sense. Projection.
It's kind of like when you take your own feelings and you put it onto someone else. So an example I'm thinking of is like someone who's in a relationship and they had an affair, but would this be one where they're like accusing the other person of having an affair, but they're actually the ones who had the affair.
Yeah, they see the guilt in everyone else, but it's actually theirs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just putting it off on somebody else, right? Like a projector on a wall. The source is from the projector, but they're putting it on the wall, so they're saying that's the wall's fault.
Got it.
Cool. Repression.
Hiding it, almost like denial, but not denial. Repressing is like to keep it under, almost like to keep it under wraps. Maybe if you've gotten hurt by a certain situation, maybe if you've gotten hurt by a person and then you have to go work with them, you repress your feelings of that hurt because you have to get this task done.
Repression means that you press it down. You don't let it show. You stuff the feelings. When a person is pressing down their emotions, they don't give themselves even the opportunity to experience or feel what they're feeling. So they'll do anything else to discard and push away the feeling. Repression could be someone who has trauma, a child that has trauma early in life that doesn't remember it, but they're acting out later. So it's like, for example, someone who has sexual abuse, but they don't remember the trauma, but they have behaviors that come out that you as a therapist, you see it, but they don't see where that's at. So it's like it's repressed down. And sometimes it's, right below the surface, you use different techniques to draw it out, but they don't even recognize that there's an issue or that something happened. So it's repressed, it's pushed down.
Got it.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
Displacement.
So that's like that one where, so your boss is really rude to you, mean to you at work, and then you come home and you didn't say anything to your boss, and then you come home and then you just treat your family like garbage. So because of, wow, you were treated at work and you didn't address it, you come home and that's what you throw in your family onto them.
Yeah. Like, and one example that we've used before for displacement is you've got a bucket of water. If you drop a brick in there, you don't blame the brick, but the water goes everywhere. It's not the brick that gets on everything, it's the water that gets on everything. So it's like it displaces all of that pain and the frustration, and what happens, it goes everywhere, right? And the table didn't deserve it, but now the table is soaked. It's to intellectualization.
I got nothing.
Oh, come on, break it down.
Nothing.
Break it down.
Nothing.
You've got this. Okay, intellectualization. Break down the big word, the $10 word, break it down into a bite-sized chunk. Intellectualize.
Nope.
What's the root word? Perfect. What does that mean?
Intelligence.
Great. And how would someone use intelligence to defend themselves?
Like a know-it-all.
Intellectualization is, instead of feeling it all, instead of experiencing it all, they know it all, right? So someone who has had intense amounts of trauma, instead of dealing with it, what do? They research it, they study it, they point it out in everybody else, they know everything about it, and they almost become unreachable because they're unteachable. They've intellectualized everything.
Got it.
You got it? Yeah. So they think about it all, but they're not actually working through anything. They know it all, but they're not actually dealing with anything. So they're defending themselves by being a know-it-all. Cool?
Yep.
Feels better?
Yeah.
Good deal. Okay. Let's do sublimation.
So when I think of sublimation, is that where you like you substitute something? Yeah.
Absolutely. So the root word of sublimation, to make it just easier, is substitution. You're substituting something that is inappropriate for something that is appropriate, right? Or is more appropriate than the other, right? So for someone who who is no longer using a substance, they might chain smoke, right? Or they might binge eat or something like that. It's a safer alternative almost, but it's a substitution for something that is unacceptable socially to something that is socially acceptable, right? Smoking or drinking or eating.
Yeah, because in my quiz, I didn't see countertransference or transference.
Well, those are not, so countertransference and transference, they're not defense mechanisms. Those are more ethical concerns, because transference and countertransference speak to client therapist relationship, not so much defense. Reaction formation.
The only thing I have for that one is going back to the root word of reacting.
Okay, but reacting how?
Not a clue.
Okay, so think about it like this. Instead of just going to that word, go to both words and almost say it backwards. Reaction, formation. Two $10 words. Forming a reaction. Form a reaction, okay? So the way to think about this is you're forming a reaction. So you're doing, where sublimation is you're substituting an action, this is you're forming a reaction. So if I'm angry at my partner, I approach her very sweetly, very kindly. I'm overly enthusiastic about them being there. I'm just over the moon and bubbly and really internally, like I just want to burn the world down. So you're forming the opposite reaction. So to my abuser, I create a space for them to be a safety net or a support, or I'm overly affectionate, or I'm doing the opposite of what would be a normal response, forming a reaction. Unacceptable impulses are replaced for their very opposite impulses. I formed a reaction. I'm doing the opposite. I'm not substituting. I'm doing the opposite. If I'm hurting, well, I'm laughing, and I'm, if I'm devastated, I'm making jokes and I'm laughing through it, and everything is fine.
That made sense.
Yeah, I'm literally doing the opposite.
That made sense.
And it's not denial, right? It's I'm literally I'm forming a reaction.
That made sense.
Cool. Denial.
Denial would be like you getting in trouble and having a consequence, and then you're just like, no, like not believing that it actually happened.
It's a distortion. Denial is disbelief that anything actually happened at all. It's not repression. It's not reaction formation. It's not sublimation. It's just a complete distortion of the situation. Like, oh, they didn't mean it like that, or they're not really gone, right? It's not pressed down, where repression is like they can't necessarily draw it up. They might be able to draw it up, but they don't see it. They don't believe it, that it is.
Oh, I'm solid with that one.
One more time, intellectualization.
It's like they're using their intelligence to rationalize something.
Perfect. That's great. That's great. When you come across these key terms, you don't have to know every single defense mechanism, but you do need to know the basis of why someone would defend, and you need to know at least the top 5 defense mechanisms. Freudian defense mechanisms are ideal because they've been around the longest, and have a firm understanding of how they could be what they are. And an easy way to do that is to break down the root. If you understand the root, you understand the fruit. If you know the root of the words, right? Reaction, formation, form a reaction. You're forming a reaction instead of reacting in anger. You're reacting with joy and contentment, and you're being happy and laughing through it, which is not helpful at all, right? It's not helpful at all. Or sublimation, where you're substituting an inappropriate social response for one that would be appropriate. Repression, you're pressing down, right? So find the root words and attach the root words to the definition, and it'll help you along the way. Ultimately, don't get in your head. These are things that you got to regurgitate. I know. You got to regurgitate them. There are things that you just have to know them, and you have to know how to apply them. So these would be things that I would say every social worker, every therapist needs to know these. So put them on flashcards, turn them into a song, write them on the sidewalk with sidewalk chalk, right? Do something that makes it stick in your mind, right? Label the people in your family with the defense mechanisms that they use the most. Any of those things, those tactics, are going to help them to solidify right here, because those are regurgitation. You just got to be able to regurgitate. The test is trying to determine who is guessing at these questions. That's what it's trying to determine. So cut out the fluff, and just the terms are the terms. The stems are the stems. The keys are the keys. The questions are the questions. You can only infer the information they give you. If they give you more information, it's because they want you to know that information to answer the question. Don't overthink these. Don't overcomplicate it. Got it?
Think so. Got it.
Oh, good deal. Go team.
Thanks.
Cool. We hope this conversation was meaningful and that you were able to gain some kind of insight into clinical defense mechanisms. Remember, the test isn't trying to trick you, it's just trying to ensure that you know the clinical information that's going to be relevant in future practice. Don't get bogged down in the jargon. Just make sure you're able to apply the most common defense mechanisms in the test environment. Check out these other videos to support you in your clinical test prep. Good luck, and you've got this.